back to the 10-Minute Professional, the podcast designed to help you navigate the political landscape of corporate America while maintaining your sanity and hopefully not becoming a soulless monster. My name is Gabe, I am your host, and I believe personal and professional development needs to happen around the clock. Time is money, and money's needed for life, so let's not waste any time and get to work so we can get back to focusing on our lives. In all aspects of my life, my approach is to come up with the lowest lift solution which yields maximum dividends. Sometimes this means a tactical or process solution. Other times it can be implementing or updating technology or automation, or perhaps developing training or reference materials depending upon the need. I give you this context as this will help frame the rest of today's conversation. In the workplace, there is nothing I detest more than ineptitude or incompetence. In an office or corporate role, it's easy to want to measure our value as being tied to a very specific set of hard or technical skills. Additionally, every company or corporation has a hierarchy that begins with individual contributors and ends with an executive board or equivalent. Over the course of my career, I've worked with executive level talent in companies of varying sizes, ranging from 10 to approximately 5,000 employees. As an individual contributor, we need to develop a very specific set of skills. Those skills are then evaluated, and in an ideal state, individuals are measured using hard data, metrics, KPIs, blah blah blah. Those at the top of the echelon are tasked with solving problems creatively or strategically, and those skills are much tougher to evaluate on a quick basis. This, in my eyes at least, makes those skills much more difficult to develop. I need to preface this next statement with a few disclaimers. This is a very limited sample size and is judged against my personal bias. I have been around many executives and board members. However, I believe I had adequate time to form a reasonable opinion of a few dozen individuals, which I know is not very many. We're talking maybe 30 to 40. With those disclaimers out of the way, of that specific sample size of 30 to 40, I can count on one hand the number of board members I sincerely believed they knew how to think strategically and creatively. While this is absolutely reductionist, and of course is only my opinion, I have the sneaking suspicion many of the people in those roles got them by virtue of sticking around and getting promoted, or perhaps hopping to another company for another promotion while sticking to the same playbook they implemented previously. Or, more than likely, because I know for a fact this was the case for a few people, mimicking what they saw someone else implement in previous roles. This is, of course, very judgmental, I will readily admit that, but the office is a political environment, so I have no qualms sharing a personal belief of mine, which is people that cannot think strategically gravitate towards political machinations, as that's easier, and unfortunately can yield results which better their personal situation. I mention this because this strikes me as a glaring inefficiency which needs to be rectified. So for today's conversation, I'd like us to break down the 4 factors I consider whenever coaching someone to shift their problem-solving methodology or thought process or approach from the micro level, solving individual, tactical, or technical problems, to the macro, where they're attempting to solve issues which require more strategic solutions. The 4 factors I consider when thinking strategically are historical context, current state, the end goal, and the framing of the question or issue, so let's break this process down. Historical context is the factor, in my personal experience, most people get hung up on. As the old adage goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and it's natural to keep doing the same thing over and over because we're accustomed to it. However, due to scale or updates or process changes or what have you, just because something is working doesn't mean it's efficient. Historical context is crucial as it helps us understand how the problem started and ideally communicates what steps have been taken or implemented previously. Ideally, historical context helps us understand why previously proposed solutions didn't work and how we reached the current state. Once historical context has been provided, I like to focus on the end goal, or the idealized state we are working to reach. If we don't have an idea of what we're hoping to reach and why, it makes planning difficult and can lead to wasting resources. Our end goal, depending of course upon the problem or issue, should be idealized but pragmatic. And using the current state of affairs is crucial to ensuring we aren't being overly ambitious with our end goal. When evaluating the current state, we must attempt to be as objective as possible and to identify as many breaks, pain points, or issues as we can. If you need to account for other organizations or internal teams, you must always minimize lift or effort. Efficiency and improvement are all centered around opportunity cost, which is an economic term which essentially means what you give up to get something in return. This means when collaborating or trying to improve something cross-functionally, you want to implement the lowest effort solutions which yield the greatest dividends. This brings us to the final, and in my professional experience, most overlooked factor when thinking strategically: how the issue is framed. When working in an office, organization, or corporation, it's very easy to fall into a routine. This is why fresh eyes can be so invaluable when evaluating and proposing ways to rectify inefficiencies. Additionally, it's commonplace for people to pose very binary questions when attempting to solve an issue. When I ran a digital marketing agency, I had a client who was dead set on promoting posts on Yelp, and they let me know they'd worked with a handful of agencies prior to working with me. When I saw their budget and the cost per click on Yelp at the same time using their existing parameters, it would have been an incredibly high expense, which would have yielded, in my opinion, negligible dividends. During one of our first meetings, I asked why they were so adamant about promoting posts on Yelp and what precisely the end goal was, such as, were they focusing on obtaining new business, expanding their user-generated content footprint, increasing visibility in the space? You get the idea. The goal was to narrow down what they were trying to accomplish. As with any client, before they tried to pull the cliche move of, well, I need all those things, they're all so important, I framed the ask as one of prioritization, given their overall budget and other things we were working on. Turns out, what they really wanted was to expand their review footprint or user-generated content. So I redirected the conversation and we found other more efficient solutions to help them reach their intended goal. Whenever a question, issue, or potential problem is raised, if you want to challenge yourself to think strategically, before you dive into the details, take a few moments to evaluate the question and consider if there are any potential ways to reframe it. For reference, reframing, at least in my eyes, is not the same as rephrasing. Rephrasing just means asking the question another way, while reframing is the angle or lens through which we choose to view a problem. One's perspective, if you will. If you ask an individual contributor what their biggest impediment is to improving efficiency, it may be a specific tool or application they have to use regularly. If you ask their manager and their manager's manager what the biggest impediments are to improving efficiency, could be soft skills, overall technical inefficiencies, or something tangential. The factors I use when thinking strategically are historical context, current state, end goal, and the framing of the issue. I consider all these factors because we need to learn how to excel within the confines of a given environment. And we do that by having as much relevant information as possible. The key word there is relevant. If someone asks a question as part of a brainstorming session that doesn't sound particularly pertinent, ask them to explain how answering that helps solve the core issue in a professional and courteous manner, of course. The goal is never to make anyone feel dumb or as if they aren't contributing, but to encourage discussion and collaboration. Thinking strategically, at least to me, does not come natural, and it isn't something that I've ever seen taught in a workplace, whether it's at the executive or the individual contributor level. So it behooves us to work on this whenever we have the opportunity. I look forward to our next discussion, and I hope you stay happy, healthy, positive, and above all, confident.